Solidity, it's not about ether, it's not about anything like that. This talk is all about you guys, okay? But first, before we talk about you, I love to talk about me, right? My name is Eric Berry. I tweet there. I'm also part of the Consensus team. I've been known to rap every now and then on the Consensus channel, so if you see me, I often do either country songs or musicals or something like that, but it's a way to have fun. And I'm a co-founder of Gitcoin. Anybody heard of Gitcoin?
I've heard of Gitcoin.
Gitcoin's a great company. I also founded a company called CodeFund, which is a project that works towards helping fund open source developers. So, you might have seen me before. We're on a whole bunch of projects that are used all over the internet. This one's Material UI. If you see an ad on the right side, you'll see that it is powered by CodeFund. The interesting part about what we do, and it sucks for advertisers. Advertisers are not super happy with us because we are ethical. We don't share data. We don't record data. We are 100% open source. So if you want ethical ads on your stuff to be able to generate revenue, you might not make crazy revenue, but you'll make ethical revenue. So that's what I do. So I do want to talk about open source a bit. Now, open source can mean many things to many people. It's had a long, rich history of what it's become, but at the end of the day, open source is really about three things. First, royalty-free redistributions of the program. So that is a requirement to be considered open source. The source code has to be open to the public. And also the modifications, any modifications and redistributions must retain the original license of that code. So the purpose behind open source is really to help fix and enhance the code, fix and improve it. Now, I enjoy reading stats. I enjoy learning about how big open source is. So I do want to share this with you. There was a study done, an audit performed in 2017 by Black Duck Software that found that 96% of the applications all over the world are using open source, are built on open source, in part. What they found when they dug in, they did an analysis on 1,001 applications that are very, very popular applications. They found that about 57% of the code was open source. So think about all those applications that you're using on your phone, on your computer, on the web. 57% of that code is open source. Crazy, right? So think about all the companies that are using this. Now the economic value of this, imagine how much it would cost. How much savings does this provide for the world? $387 billion is what open source is worth. That'll actually take, I think I read that 19 million years for one person to rebuild all of open source, which is crazy, right? Now, for all of those who are no longer connected to regular fiat currency, which I know you're not, so I converted this over to Bitcoin. So this right here might not make much sense to you, but hopefully this does, right? Right, oh yeah, exactly, okay. And of course, why are we all in open source, right? It's all because of the Lamborghinis and the flying around the moon, right? That's why we're doing this. Actually, that's not why we're doing this. I want to talk about why we're doing this, though. What actually motivates us to work on open source? What motivates the Truffle team to build this thing openly and involve all of you? So, obviously the answer, it's October, so obviously the answer for contributing to open source is the free t-shirt, right? If you haven't got your free t-shirt yet, make sure you get your free t-shirt. If you're a contributor, they make it really simple, 5 commits, and get it done. 5 pull requests, yes. Okay, so, in all seriousness, there are 2 main reasons why people, that motivate people to work on open source. And they fall into 2 categories, the intrinsic and the extrinsic motivations. Now, intrinsic motivations are when you do something because you find enjoyment or find it interesting. Extrinsic is when you do something for external rewards or to avoid negative consequences. So for example, someone who was contributing open source might be interested in doing it for personal hobby. Or maybe they enjoy the learning aspect of it. Perhaps they find the culture fun and interesting, or maybe they just have an altruistic nature about themselves that they just love to give back, right? All great motivations. extrinsic is equally important. Maybe you want peer recognition. We all thrive on this. I especially do. I love knowing that what I build affects other people, and I like to hear back. That's why we're all like posting on Facebook and Instagram. Don't lie to me. I know it, you know? So, career advancements. We want to be able to build the tool chain within ourselves to be able to get better jobs, maybe a higher salary. How about self-marketing? How many times have you gone to a job interview where they don't ask you, what's your GitHub URL, right? What's your GitHub username? It's a big part of who we are now. It's actually the new resume. And finally, the financial rewards that could come from it. Now, I want to take a step back from this, and I want to discuss two concepts of the open source flow. So what that is the contributor and the maintainer and the difference between them. Now, some of this might be reviewed for you guys, but just so that we are on common terms, the contributor is someone who contributes back to the project. That can either be through bug fixes, build new features, enhance documents, fix typos, anything where they're able to give back to a project, which is awesome. The maintainer, on the other hand, is the person or people responsible for driving the vision and managing the organizational aspects of the project. So they're also doing the contribution side, but they're doing as well the bug triaging, the PR reviews, and making sure that the project is going in the right direction. At the end of the day, they're the ones responsible for that project. So I want to focus on the maintainer for a moment and talk about what I've found a maintainer typically can go through. Now, let's say we all create a brand new Truffle. We all create our own project. And this project comes out, and right out of the gate, we get a lot of positive response. People are like, wow, that's awesome. And you get a lot of great feedback. This is exactly what I wanted. And you feel really good about it. And it's great. Open source is awesome. Win-win. But as time goes on, what tends to happen is that project becomes more popular. With more popularity becomes more responsibility. So now all of a sudden, you're like, people are saying, hey, I submitted this PR, will you please review it? Or hey, do you think we can add this feature in here? Or they're kind of wanting to like get in there and make some changes. And all of a sudden, you go from this mentality of like, wow, this is the best thing in the world to, oh, this is actually something that's kind of like a job. It's just what I like to do, okay? Let's fast forward a little bit further. And then it gets really big. People get angry. Like, developers are mean, right? They can be mean. So, why haven't you fixed this yet? What's wrong with you? Is this project dead? I'm going to fork this, and everybody follow me, right? It's like, what the hell am I doing? So these developers, they go through this cycle of like, well, I don't know if I want to do this anymore. And they get really, really grumpy about it. Fast forward. They get grumpy, right? They get pissed. Why are we doing this, right? Yes, exactly. So I want to talk about this concept called the truck factor. Now the truck factor is it's a key part of the rest of this presentation. So the truck factor you might have heard of. Truck factor is also something like the bus factor, or maybe the lottery factor. Basically, it's like how many people will it take to get hit by a truck before this project is in jeopardy, right? This is scary. This video, man, it scares me. That dude, woo. All right, so there's a study done back in 2016, an independent study that determined the truck factor for the top 100 projects on GitHub, the most used projects on GitHub. What do they find? They found that about 65% of those have a truck factor of 1 or 2. What does that mean? That means that if 2 people get hit by a bus, or 1 person gets hit by a bus, that project is in jeopardy. There's no more maintainer. Who takes control, right? For example, do any of these look familiar? Truck factor of 2, right? You want to see something even scarier? Right? My project is open source. CodeFund is open source. We use Redis, we use Moment, we use FontAwesome, we use Vue, we use Lodash, and I think we use Socket as well. All of these maintained by 1 person. So I want to focus real quick, for example, on one of these projects, which is Semantic UI. Now, has anybody heard of Semantic UI? Semantic UI is incredible. It's a bootstrap competitor. It allows you to be able to create really cool projects that, it's basically like a scaffolding, a built-in CSS framework for your projects. So It's also run by one maintainer named Jack Lukic. And so Jack, you can see how big the project is, 40,000 stars on GitHub. Notice how many issues there are, 583 issues. One guy. So what happens, late last year he wrote, after having spent about 3 years of my life trying to make open source work with part-time proprietary work or just being plain broke, I don't think I know of any other way that seems reasonable without compromising the software. Unfortunately, it means that I have to push back on development until I can find the means for financing to sustain it. It's sad, right? It's sad. So let me ask you this. Is open source really free?
Free speech, not free beer.
Free speech, not free beer. By the way, I rewrote this talk 3 times since last night. So it used to be a lot funnier, but not as good a content. So you're welcome, and I'm sorry. So no, it's not free, right? We have him paying for it, right? Jack's paying for it. What is he paying for it with? What currency is he paying for it with?
Time.
Time. And then a burnout. Oh.
Perfect timing.
Come on. Let's see. I might need to turn my laptop around. There we go. Oh, that's so much like me. There we go. All right. Let's see if this works. Okay. So he's not the only project that's doing this, right? Homebrew. Okay. Kyle Matthews, which of course he's funded now, but he talks about open source projects can fall into an uncanny valley. They're good enough to be dominant, but can't attract enough funding to become great. Babel has gone through a massive issue. In fact, Henry Shue, I think Henry Shue is the person behind it. He recently gave a talk that talked about the frustrations that he has to go through to be able to find funding. He actually has to take time away from the development of Babel, a significant amount of time just to go fundraising, right? ReactiveX, same thing. Open source is a strange thing. The open source work I do is clearly the most impactful work I do, but nobody wants to pay me to do it. Yet I'm asked to speak about it. The work that I'm actually paid to do, no one really wants to hear about it, right? So, last year, there's a group of people that decided to do something about it. They got together in San Francisco, June 19th last year. They're actually doing it again this year. I'm going in 2 weeks in London. 100 people gathered in San Francisco to create a cultural shift in how we think about the sustainability of open source. Up until that point, people were like, open source should be free. It's my gift to the community. Why should we be paid? That's kind of breaks the system, right? Well, in their report, they created this report called Sustain. You go to sustainoss.org to find it. In that report, they say that key pieces of open source, of which many applications depend on, are often supported by small groups of individual contributors with no financial obligation, right? No financial, no contractual obligation to do so. This has created a landscape in which the goodwill of the few can no longer sustain the increasing demands of the ecosystem that's placed on it, right? Throughout the report, they also talk about the use of money as an incentive for open source. So, I want to coin the phrase here today. We've heard of we've heard of deployal. I introduced Fundle. Okay, so you might ask me, hey Eric, how do I fundle my project? Right? So the rest of this talk, I want to talk about the different aspects, the different ways that we can fund it. First, there is an incredible document on GitHub called the Lemonade Stand, put out by Nadia Iqbal, who is a fascinating person to follow. If you don't follow her on Twitter, don't follow her blog, you really should. She is a voice that speaks for any open source person. So, but this list is so long, and I used to have a video of like it scrolling from the top to the bottom, and it ended up crashing my computer, so I decided not to have that slide, but just imagine like a really tall slide here. So what I found out is it really breaks out into 3 different sections: donations, license, and support. So all of these 3 different methods of funding fall into three categories. And I want to talk about each one of those briefly. How am I doing on time? Okay. I want to talk about each one of these briefly and talk about the pros and cons of each one. So first off, the donation side. Donations are when you ask for money from others to support your project. It does work, it works really well. for some. Now, some of the pros are there's a very low barrier of entry. It doesn't take a lot to go to PayPal or something and grab one of those buttons and put it on your website and say, hey, pay me, right? The problem is nobody pays. When's the last time that you saw one of those buttons that, oh, I'm going to pay that, right? Nobody does. Ken C. Dodds, anybody heard of him? So Ken C. Dodds is a phenomenal developer. He built the project CrossEnd. He's also an instructor, a good friend of mine. He had those buttons on all of his projects, 50,000 downloads a day. All of those projects he had those buttons on. How much money did he get after 1 year? Zero, right? It's frustrating. So, but the good thing about it, I should not talk about the bad things that we're done with the good things. It allows developers to focus on the code. And that's one of the things that I find interesting is that all of us are developers, right? The majority of us are developers. What do we love to do? We love to code. I'm a developer. I haven't coded in a while because I'm trying to run a business, and I find myself so frustrated because I can't just get in the code and fix the issues that I'm normally used to fixing. So we love the code. If we want to continue to code, this is a great path. However, the problem is very little payout without fundraising efforts, and also it may require a larger audience. You can't just throw a button on a project that is fairly new and not get a lot of funding. Okay, some of the paths that you can take for this are the Ruby Together, the Open Collective Foundation, PayPal buttons, Ethereum Foundation grants. There are a bunch of different ways. And I broke this out into this very, very, very statistically relevant data-backed chart, which I created out of my ass. And you can see that the higher potential funding here, and then the time away from code, right? So really, how much time do we take away from code, and how much potential funding do we have? So in donations, not a lot of potential, but it doesn't take us away from the code. If that's what you like, that's okay, right? That's okay. If you're needing more funding, you are going to need to change. Let's talk about the second category, support. Now, support is the sales of time, of training, of merchandise. Basically, you have a project that you can sell support for in all these different mediums. Pros, really good for marketing, right? Also, it helps you keep aligned with the needs of the people because you are always communicating with them. They will tell you what you need, what they need when you're going through these trainings. Your books will get the feedback. You're going to have that nice loop. Some of the problems with that is that smaller projects don't benefit. Also, paid training is rarely in demand. Most of the time, people can just look online, read docs. And then finally, it can be a big distraction from the core development. Again, if you're okay with that, it's not a big deal. But if you aren't, that might not be the path that you want to go. So a really good example of this, I'm a Ruby developer by trade. For 10, 15 years, 10 years I've been doing Ruby. Before that, I was Java and PHP, but we don't talk about that anymore. Trailblazer is a framework that sits on top of Ruby on Rails, enhances it. Look at their homepage. So they offer freemium support, right? Paid support. They have this marketing channel where you can get free stickers if you take an action, and also have a book. So they're really in that support chain, and they're supporting this project that's being sustained from that path. So back to my awesome chart. Here it goes up, to the right and up, but medium, right? So finally, the other one, the other big category is licensing and usage. So this is the sale of licenses or features or paid hosting, stuff like that. Some of these projects you're very familiar with. For example, Sidekick is a perfect example of this. So pros, it can scale well. It has potential to provide full-time income. Some of the problems is it has the smaller projects don't really benefit. It can be a huge distraction, but the biggest thing here is it requires you to have an entrepreneur mindset, right? You have to be business-minded. Now, I've found that being developer-minded and business-minded don't go well together because I'm trying to run a business and I suck at it, right? But some people don't, and so that's a great path for people who do have that mentality. I want to turn this into a business, and of course, way to the right, but you're not really coding anymore at all. So there are three things in that chart that I showed you initially. don't really fit into one category, they fit into multiple. And these are the things that are more interesting to me as a developer. Now again, I'm sharing all of these with you not to say this is what you should do or shouldn't do, but I want to give you the options of what's out there so that you know that if you decide that funding is important for you and the sustainability of your project, you have options. So here are the three that are left out. So the first one is crowdfunding. Now crowdfunding is basically when you go out and ask for, you generate funds, a really big amount of funds, either one time or recurring. So there's very few strings attached. It can be very easy to manage because there's programs out there that do this, like Patreon, LiberaPay, Open Collective, Flatter. There's a whole bunch of stuff. However, it can be hard to get commitments for recurring donations. It's usually not a ton of money. It's about 1 to 4K a month, and it may require a very, very large audience. So the next one is, I don't want to get ahead of myself here. Here's an example. So Evan Yu, we talked about a little bit earlier. No, we didn't. Evan Yu is the creator of Vue.js. Now, he set up a Patreon page, and he's currently getting about $17,000 a month just through Patreon.
Wow.
How much effort has he had to put in to be able to get that? How much marketing has he had to do? How many negotiations has he had to make that happen? So it kind of veers off the path, and it doesn't take as much time away from code. It does provide a fairly good income source. 2 more categories to go. Bounties. So Gitcoin, Bounties Network, I think they're both represented here. So bounties is when you earn money for contributing to open source. This is the one where it veers off from, this is my project, to I want to make money as a developer working on open source for other people's projects. It's pretty awesome. Anyone can participate. The money is tied to doing specific work, so there's a defined payout. You do this, you get this. And then it can often lead to a job placement, which is awesome, especially in our industry, right? Bounties is really big in blockchain because where are the blockchain developers? How do we get people involved? Bounties are a great way to do that. However, they don't usually pay very much. It's less than $500 typically per bounty. And it doesn't provide a recurring revenue. You're gonna have to continue. So it's literally saying, I'm going to do this for work, or this is now my side job. And then finally, it may require a specialized skill, especially when it comes to security-based bounties. There's a lot of open bounties out there, but they're typically security-based. So if you're a really good hacker and you have a lot of extra time, this is a great way to go. So some examples of places you can do this is Gitcoin, of course, Bounties Network. Gitcoin's built on top of Bounties Network. Bounty Source, Bounty 0x, Internet Bug Bounty. There's a whole bunch of them out there. And you see, it takes very little time away from code. It does take time away from your day job, but it takes very little time away from code and has a fairly decent return. Then finally, advertising. Now, advertising is a weird thing, and I love advertising. I love and hate advertising. I run an advertising platform, right? And I kind of hate ads because I kind of hope that I'm not in business in 5 years, if that makes sense. I hope that ads are not a good source of income for developers. I hope that kind of goes away and other things happen. But until then, I want to provide ethical ads for developers to be able to tap into that market without having to sacrifice the trust of their developers. So anyway, some of the pros on this are it's very passive income. Literally, what I tell people is you set one line of code in your project and you forget about it and you just get paid every month. It's very recurring, reliable income. Typically, if you have a certain property that generates X amount of impressions per month, you're going to get a consistent payout of Y per month. Last month, I paid out to 22 developers. I paid out $6,800. So pretty good, right? Some of the cons will require a large enough audience, so you can't just come in and say, we don't have any traffic, but I want ads to run. They're not going to work. Potentially, you'll lose the trust of your user base. Now, that depends on who you go through. And then finally, a couple more things. It has potential ethical concerns. If you're going through, like, for example, Google Ads. Google Ads right now is in hot water because they are tracking the shit out of all of us, right? They understand every little aspect of us. And that's because of these ads. So you put ads on your site, all of a sudden the people that are using your site are going to lose trust in you. No. And then finally, it could possibly introduce a conflict of interest. Now let me explain that. When ads become a motivation, when the finance becomes a core motivation of your project, it will start to direct your project. Now you have to be very aware. I've had this guy that I've been working with. He runs Redux Forum. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's an awesome project. His name is Eric Rasmussen, good friend. He told me that since using CodeFund, it's changed the way he views his project. It actually makes him think of it more as, this is a source of income. This is actually a project that's a source of income versus a project of passion. So there is that line that you have to be careful of. So some good places to go, not just CodeFund, but CodeFund and Read the Docs were both ethical ads. Carbon is non-ethical, but they are bigger and they'll probably pay more. And then Google Ads, of course. These are some of the options. Now, back to this awesome chart. Funding is up. No code difference at all. Literally one line of code, you're done. Okay? So, now I ask you, where are you? Oh, I'm out of time. Where are you? Like, where does this all fit in you? What does this matter to you? So, it really comes down to your personality. What type of, how do you want to integrate this into your life? What are you willing to give up versus what you want back? And so I created a silly little quiz that you can pick up in the back. Honestly, when I did this, I expected 50 or 30 or 20 people to be here, not as many as are here right now. So I printed 50, but there's this silly quiz in the back that'll help you kind of understand more of what it is. In reality, it has no real value at all, other than it kind of lists out like what options there are. So with that, I'm going to say thank you. That is my presentation. I don't know if I have any time for, no time. So thank you all.
In the lobby?
Okay, you have questions out in the lobby. Thank you very much.